Hello and welcome to the Carteret Cast, the podcast for everything Carteret County. I'm your host, Sawyer Davis, and I'm super excited to be here at the History Museum of Carteret County to hear a panel on law enforcement and the history in Carteret County. Now I'm going to give it over to Gracie Bender for the introduction.
Welcome, everybody. You don't have to take a sip just yet, but I wanted to welcome everybody and start. Welcome to the History Museum of Carteret County. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you so much to all of our guests that are here that are going to share stories with us on the history of law enforcement in Carteret County. But to get us started, we want to go ahead and eat this wonderful smelling food that's in the room. So I've asked Bob Guthrie, who is one of our board of trustees, and he's also our great storyteller. So keep it short, Bob.
Okay.
Keep it short. Okay. But we're going to say a blessing on the food. And then when he finishes saying the blessing, we'd like for everybody to just head back and start at one end of the line and grab your lunch and your drink. And then for about 20 minutes, we'll eat. And then we'll start the panel. Sound good? Everybody? Okay, go ahead, Bob.
Before a prayer, I usually explain this. Where do we live? A place where sea and sand and sky come together to create a new Eden. This is where we live, a new Eden. If for nothing else, we need to give thanks for that, because we could have been born anywhere else. But God put us right here. And those he didn't put here got here as soon as they could. And we're glad that they're here too. So now we're going to return thanks. Be present at this table, Lord. Be here and everywhere adored. Thy creatures bless and grant that we may feast at last in heaven with thee. Amen.
Hello again to everyone. I wanted to welcome you again to the History Museum of Carteret County. I wanted to see who all in this room is a member of the History Museum. Oh, thank you so much for your support. We live and breathe by you guys. So also not just the membership fees and so forth, but also, your ideas and the history that you bring into our place. So we really appreciate you being here. Very thankful that you're here. On your table, I wanted everyone to be able to see that we have recently printed a new brochure, but inside the brochure that talks about the History Museum, it also shows the beautiful map that we now have out at the front. That's been really wonderful. And a brief history, we had 650 fourth graders come through here, all of the Carteret County fourth graders, both in March and in April. It was amazing. Some days we were all very ready to go home at the end of the day. But they learned a lot, but we have some events on an event card that's stuck inside that brochure. So please take that with you and consider coming to our next event. Our next event is June the 7th, which is a summer craft fair. It's an early summer craft fair. We'll have lots of vendors in here. And plus your admission gets you into the museum that day. And then we also have a genealogy workshop on June 14th. And that's going to be with the Styron family especially. And there's going to be some entertainment, some special food. It'll be pretty good. So the other thing I wanted to mention to you, as you walk out the door, we have our new quarterly. By new, I mean this particular time. It was just published in May. And so you can pick one of those up as you walk out if you haven't already gotten it in the mail or haven't received it digitally as well. So just wanted to let you guys know about that and to tell you that I'm really excited today to have the beginning of the history of, it's not the beginning, we had the history of surfing, and that was really good. We had that last month. But I would like to introduce to you Walter Steele, our board president, and he is going to tell you a little bit more about the E-Cube series, which is part of the history of law enforcement now for the History Museum. Mr. Walter Steele, come on up.
Can you all hear well enough? I heard that. So welcome again. Thank you. Gracie just mentioned E cubed, which was an idea that I had that, in my opinion, makes something simple. So E cubed, or E3, if you will, stands for engage. So when people walk in, we want to engage them, be friendly. Next thing we expect to do generally is to entertain them. So we hope that when you come here, you feel entertained. And then lastly, if we're doing things really well, we're educating people. So that's what E3 stands for. And if you think of the history of blank in Carteret County, any idea that comes to your mind that you'd like to share with us, we'd be more than happy to, queue it up for another session. So thank you for that. This being the history of law enforcement in Carteret County, we have a group here, a fine group, and I know most of them, and I just met David today, so welcome. Should I introduce by name? I can remember. So down on the end, you have Asa Buck, our sheriff. Welcome. Next, you have Garland Terry. And then next you have Richard Abel. Now, Richard, I've been corrected sometimes. Sometimes I'll say Abel, and sometimes I'll say Abel.
When I was growing up, from my father down to all five of my brothers, we were always called Abel. So we didn't ever nothing that were talking to it.
And I know, Garland, you ran for office, but I don't remember what your position is now.
No, I'm a city council.
You're a city councilor, right? For Morehead City.
Yeah, Morehead City. Yes.
And Garland, did you get elected? I can't remember. No. Okay. All right. And then Ren Johnson. And I know Ren does a few different things. You work at the community college, right? And you also do, you have a seafood place, right? So welcome. David is our author, David Bratton. And I'm sorry, I don't remember your daughters or your granddaughter, Savannah. So welcome to you both. And he has you just. So, I don't know what else we were going to do as far as the program. If you want to describe how it's going to work.
Thanks, Walter. Great idea, too, that E3 series. So be looking for more of that. This one is just the history of law enforcement. I was thinking they might bring some guns today. Okay, so the way we'd like for it to go is each speaker is going to come up to the podium and talk to us about whatever they're wanting to talk about. And each of them are going to be unique and different in what they're going to talk about. And then as you have questions and they call on you, we are recording both what they are saying and the questions. I didn't want to say that to scare you off now. But Sawyer Davis, who has been working with us, he's this young man sitting right over here on my left. You're right. He is recording things on what we call the Carteret cast, what he calls the Carteret cast. And so you'll be able to hear this particular event again by audio. Okay. So each person, 10 to 15 minutes, come up to the podium, talk about what you want to talk about, answer questions that you'd like to answer. And then at the very end, I'm thinking that questions inspire more questions. So you might have thought of another question towards the end. So we'll open that up for questions as well that any of you can field. Does that sound okay? Sorry, my little speaker here is right in front of me. I see you guys there. Okay, so the first speaker we have is Mr. David Bratton, and he has written a book, and he's going to talk about some funny things. If you guys, he'll also have these books for sale right here, if anybody wants to purchase one of those books. So come on up, Mr. David Bratton.
First of all, I want to thank the History Channel, channel. I've said that, and since the first time I was here for that first book signing, that's what the History Place for inviting me. But really, that was a great intro. But the reason they invited me, they needed an old guy. Yeah, they needed somebody at the start of talking about the history of law enforcement here. If I'm not mistaken, I taught everybody that was sitting out there in BLET. I started law enforcement in 1975, born and raised in Newport. Went away for a little while, come back, started law enforcement at Atlantic Beach in 1975. And I retired in 2018 as a captain and assistant chief at Havelock. In between Atlantic Beach, I worked at the sheriff's department way back when there weren't but 8 people there. And a little while with the Newport Police Department, then went to Havelock in 1983 and stayed there. And yes, I did write a book. I never had any intentions of writing a book. I'm not an author. But after I retired, and a little while time before I retired, and I hate standing still, I started putting some blurbs on Facebook, just little funny things on Facebook and some stupid things that I did on Facebook. And everybody said, you should write a book. You should write a book. Well, then I got to thinking about it and looking together and said, well, maybe I could. Because the book is about my time at Atlantic Beach from 1975 until about 1980 when I went to the sheriff's department. But even at the sheriff's department then, still at Atlantic Beach. So the first half of the book is all stories, funny stories about Atlantic Beach. And the second half of the book is about the sheriff's department, mainly. And it's easy. It's easy reading. And the thing about it is, and what a lot of people don't understand is, when my generation is dead, there's going to be nobody left alive that actually walked around Atlantic Beach when it was what it was. You know, everybody knows and sees what it is now. When I worked there and started in 1975, on any given summer night, Friday or Saturday summer night, there's anywhere between 1,500 and 3,000 people around the circle. The bars, all of the bars in the whole place, there was about 40-some bars. And it was a completely different atmosphere, completely different time in policing. And we used to say back then, working one summer at Atlantic Beach was like working 2 years at any other Eastern North Carolina police department because of what you had to do and the number of people. It was a magical time between the middle 60s and the late 80s when it started going downhill. But that was a magical bubble of time for everybody that will never be again because of the culture's changed, politics have changed, music has changed, and it will never be again like it was. So that's one reason, the main reason I ended up writing the book, so that it just gives you a glimpse of a little bit of a history of what it was when it was something. I don't really know where to go from here, but I'll tell you, when I started at Atlantic Beach in 1975, talking about the history of law enforcement, our grand salary, my salary was $6,800 a year. And that was pretty good. In 1978, the state of North Carolina said you had to pay all law enforcement $8,000 a year. And all of the mayors and all the county commissioners and city commissioners, they all went crazy because we're all going broke. We can't afford $8,000 a year. And it's gotten progressively better now to where the salaries they're not where they need to be, but they're coming on up. And times have changed so much from when I was at Atlantic Beach. It was much easier to police then, and I think better to police. And you could help people more then than you can now. You don't do exactly right now, somebody's going to sue you. Back then, if you didn't hit me or spit on me or tear my shirt or do something like that, and you were just being obnoxious, I could put you in my police car and take you home or drop you off somewhere. And you could help people. But if I did that now and you cut your finger or do whatever, you're going to sue me. So those days are over with. And speaking of dropping off, one of the stories in the book is, and maybe remember, I don't know if we were still doing that when you come along or not. Yeah. But on a good Saturday, Friday, or Saturday night, we'd have our regular drunks, the ones that didn't bother nobody. They were happy drunks, and they were there every Friday or Saturday night. And if we could go to them and get them and say, come on, I'll take you over to Moorhead or take you home. So we put them in the back seat of the police car and we drive them over the bridge. And used to be at the foot of the bridge was a service station, a payphone, and right up the road was the Waffle House. So we'd drop them off at the payphone and say, go ahead and call your taxi or whoever, somebody come get you. Most of them did that. But then some of them were slow learners and they didn't, and they go to Waffle House and cause a ruckus or whatever, and a Moorhead City officer come by and see them. And after a while, they caught on to what we were doing. So they put them back in the Moorhead City police car and drive them back to the beach and put them out. Then we catch them. Some people, they rode back and forth all night long on a great Saturday night, and they woke up hungover the next morning thinking they had the best time in the world at the beach. And they didn't do nothing but ride in the back of a police car. But it helped us, because if we didn't arrest them, we could get rid of them in 30 minutes. If we did arrest them, it would take somebody off of the street for at least an hour and a half, 2 hours to process them and put them in jail. And they didn't really need to go to jail anyway. They just needed to ride Moorhead. And that's all they needed. So things have changed. You couldn't do that this day and time for any amount of money at all. So things have changed. When I started, I worked the first 10 months you didn't have to go to BLET then when you first got hired on the police side. And myself and another officer, which all these people know, Jay Smith, on our 10th month, we went to BLET. It was 160 hours, and it was at the old law enforcement club at the foot of the runway over in Beaufort. Now it's 800 and some hours, I think, long the BLET is now. And we slept 70 of the 160 hours when me and Jay went over there. So the training has got immensely better than what it was and what we had. But it was kind of like the Wild West whenever I started. It was kind of changing over from the Wild Wild West to the Wild West. And now it's got a really sophisticated now. So it was a whole lot more fun then than it is now. But again, it was a magical time on the circle in Carteret County that will never be again. But one thing I am going to tell, because the statute of limitations have run out many, 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 many years ago. After I worked at Atlantic Beach, there were two places to work better than the city in Carteret County. And that was the Sheriff's Department and County ALE. If you became a County ALE officer, that's what young officers aspired to be. If you wanted to be able to go out and about and not have somebody look over your shoulder, the Sheriff's Department, because there were only 8 officers, only 8 deputies in, and then one County ALE officer. There was a deputy in the west from Highway 24 and 70 west to the county line in Carteret County. There was a deputy in the city limits of Moorhead, and then a deputy to the east, all the way to the east. In most cases, then you had the jailer in the old one-story jail, and then you had Pearl, and that was basically it. And you were free to roam and do whatever you wanted to do. But after I had started with the Sheriff's Department, and I'd been on about a week and a half, in Atlantic Beach, we served arrest warrants. We didn't do any civil, so I had no clue really what a civil subpoena or anything civil was. And you have to remember, back then, there were no computers, there were no instant communications of anything. I was riding with a big old fella, and I mean a big old fella, and he'd been dead and gone for a good while now. And we were coming back to Beaufort about 3 o'clock one morning, and we were coming across the top of the Moorhead City Beaufort Bridge, and and he had a whole stack of civil subpoenas. He said, I'm going to show you how to serve these civil subpoenas. He rolled down his window and flung them right off the bridge. He said, served. And I said, oh, my. No, I never heard any more about it. I never said nothing to nobody. I never heard any more about it. So I don't know. They couldn't have been that important. But that's what a lot of that went on back there. It just, you kept the wheels of justice moving. And you could do that. And you had a couple of clerks down there in the basement it was in the clerk's office would basically do the same thing, but they used a trash can. And a couple of lawyers and judges. My Judge Roberts, he was retired whenever I came over there, but he was a special judge. He was about 100 years old when I started. But he knew my wife's mother, and she's from Salterpath. And every time he would come, he would call up and say, make me some clam chowder. And my wife's mother would make a big pot of clam chowder and take it over, and he'd eat it in the chambers over there at the old courthouse. It was all fixed up and everything. So times were different, things were different, and it was much, a much more fun time. You didn't have to worry so much about, the cameras and all of that. Thank goodness. There's 43 vignettes. I wrote this in vignettes, 43 easy reading vignettes in here. And I could have put 143, and I just might. Some things will never be in here. They will stay lost to time forever as they should be. But that was law enforcement then. And as we moved along, as the years, went by, we a little better. Oh, and I forgot, when I went to the sheriff's department, I had to buy my own car. I had to buy my own equipment, gun, and everything. They give me, I believe it was $1,200 a month for maintenance on the car, gas, anything to do, car payment. I had to pay my own car payment and all of that. You had to do all of that. You worked 7 days a week, 24 hours a day with 2 days off. And you could go home and sleep, but if you went home at 1 o'clock, you get called out at 1:30. You might not get back home to the next day. So things have changed immensely since those times. And overall, it's for the better. There have been some things that's not for the better. I'm of the old school. I like the kind of sharp-looking uniform, beards. I'm not a big fan of beards. And, if you look sharp, if you look like you know what you're doing, you're going to get the respect that you need out there on the street. And honestly, I don't know what others. I think we've lost some of that by the way we're dressing out there on that. So that's my story. I could go on and on with this, that I didn't have it 10 minutes. Sure.
Can you tell me what kind of car you had to pick? Like you said, you had to buy your own car.
Most of what we did back then, you could buy a retired highway patrol car for $3,000. It had 60-some thousand miles on it. They would turn them in around 60, 70,000 miles, and the highway patrol would sell them until we go to. Well, we didn't go to the auction, but we would go where the state auctioned them, and we would call them up most of the time and say, look, we want to get a car for what we're doing. And they would cherry pick one and pick it out and hold it for us. Now, it come in there white, so they repainted it. It was white. If you want another color, you had to pay for it. And that's the way I got mine, and most all of the deputies got them that way. And then you just had a star they put on the side of it, and that was it.
Can you say the name of your book?
Beach Nights and Blue Lights. Beach Nights and Blue Lights. Like I said, the first half is pretty much all centered on the circle, and then the second half has got a whole lot of stories in there about the sheriff, when I worked with the sheriff's department. And I'll tell you one more quick story. I've told this in classes for years and years and years, but it was funny. Same fella, Jay Smith, he was a deputy. We were deputies together. And one afternoon, we both happened to be at the sheriff's department, and we got a call to go what was in Shirley's Bar down east. So we got in one car, and we head down to Shirley's Bar. There was a fight down there. So we get down there, and we pull in, and she tells us who it was. I'm not going to use any names. Some of y'all might be kin. And we got there, tells us who it was, and we said, okay. And this fella lived just right. You leave the bar and you just went right up the road. He was right there. So we get there, and there he is in his yard. He's getting out of the car, and he's what we call a fish box chunker. He was about 6'1" or 2", and he worked on the fishing boats and the big old wooden fishing boxes. Yeah, that's what he chunked fishing boxes all day full of fish. He was not little. I mean, muscles everywhere. And we said, oh, I'm going to call him Tom. But he wasn't Tom. I said, Tom, you got to go with us. He goes, I'm not going. He was drunk. He says, I'm not going today. And we knew him. He knew us, and he had a sheath knife on, a fishing knife, like you would expect a fisherman to carry. And he grabbed at it. I don't think he ever meant to pull it, but Jay hit him with his PR-24 baton. We didn't know it at the time, but Jay broke his arm. It didn't even faze him, though. So we jumped on him and said, yeah, you going with us? And he's saying, no, I'm not. He didn't try to hit us, didn't swing at us. He was just, I'm not going. And we had him saying, yes, you are. And we were wrestling around out there in the yard. And we all three got so tired, we just stopped and just kind of sat there and looked at each other and panicked for a little while. And that time his brother come out of the house, which he wasn't quite right. And as we went back to wrestling, you got to go with us. And he goes, I'm not going. And we wrestling. And then his brother was standing on the porch eating graham crackers or something and spitting them on us as we were fighting in the yard. Finally, he just give up. We didn't take it. He just give up. He said, okay, I'll go. So we got him hooked up, and his brother started coming off the porch, and he called his brother and said, get back in the porch, get back in the house, don't give him any trouble. And he just, so, and he did. We brought him to jail. Saw him the next morning after he got out, his arm in a sling, and he said, y'all broke my arm. But he said it was all right. He said, I shouldn't have fought y'all like that. But the sheriff got mad at us. The sheriff called us in his office and told us we ought not have broke his arm and done this and that. And it is what it is, And we fought him again many times. He was a good guy until he got drinking. And then he just didn't want to go to jail most of the time. So those are the things that went on that you would never see happen very much today, like it did. And then time marches on. This guy goes to rookie school, and now I'm just a retired dinosaur way far out of it. I appreciate it. Appreciate your time, and hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. I thought that was very entertaining. And I've had a chance to read that book, too. So there's a lot of great stories in there that I had never known about Atlantic Beach Circle, too. So next up, we have Mr. Richard Abel. And Ms. Wren, do you want to come up with him? Would you like to be second after him? How do you want? Okay, I like that. I figured something like that. Okay, so come on up.
I will. Thank you. Thank y'all for inviting us here today. This is pretty cool. This is pretty cool. I am Richard Abel, and I started my law enforcement career and ended it, kind of, Sheriff, with Morehead City. There's a couple of things that I knew when I was in high school. Law enforcement is where I wanted to be. Actually, I thought that I wanted to go on the federal side, either through the Secret Service or the Treasury Department, one of those agencies, until I was in high school and didn't do real well. And I thought, I'm done with school, so I knew probably my senior year I wanted to be a police officer. I'm proud to say that I think I'm still the youngest police officer that was ever hired in Morehead City, because I turned 20 in September of 1977 and went through rookie school. Now, mine was only 8 hours longer than what David's. Mine was 168 hours long, and we took it right there. Then it was called Carteret Technical Institute in the old Wayne West building, where David wound up teaching some as well. And then I got hired at Morehead City in November of 1977. One of my fondest memories is when I went down. I had a couple of officers. I was working a little part-time before I got with the police department at Rose's department store in Morehead Plaza. And one of the officers came in and said, come on, I said, "Where are we going?" He said, "You're going to go down and interview with the chief." I said, "Chief Fulcher?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Okay." So I had already put my application in, obviously. So he took me down, and I thought we were going to the police department. Nope, we went down on the waterfront because the chief, Hubert Fulcher, had his own party boat, fishing boat that he took parties out on. It was called miraculously the Blue Water One. He actually had a blue light set up on top of it. So I got down there and was on the little finger dot, and I said, "Chief, permission to come aboard?" He said, "Come aboard." So I stepped on board, and he asked me one question. He said, "Richard, why do you want to be a police officer?" Then, of course, I told him that, it's probably the answer that most people give is, well, it's something I want to be able to give something back to the community, and I want to make a difference, basically, is what I said. So I was waiting for the second question and then the second question was, "When can you start?" I said, "Wow." I said, "When do you want me to start?" He said, "What about Friday?" I said, "Friday it is." So I spent 34 actual years there in the police department and saw a lot. That police department, if it wasn't for the police department, there's a lot of things that I experienced that I would not have experienced. And I'll just name a few of those. I actually got to work the 1996 Summer Olympics in Atlanta. The department allowed me to go down for the 30 or 40 days, whatever it was, in Atlanta to work the Summer Games. And then again in 2002, when the Winter Games were in Salt Lake City, I applied and again got accepted and worked the games at Salt Lake City. The only difference was in '96 we were not sworn officers. We were, and they pulled officers in from all over the United States. And in '96 they also pulled officers from other countries. Like there was a group that I worked with: Germany, Australia, and Canada. But we were not sworn. Salt Lake City, obviously, 1 year after 9/11. They swore all of us in the state of Utah, so we were gun-toting, so to speak, Utah officers during the time we were there. The other thing, and I know David has met probably in his time it was a sitting president, but he's met presidents obviously from being there at Havelock at Cherry Point, and I was able to meet George H.W. Bush. Obviously, he was not the president at the time. It was after the fact. I guess his son was the president. But he actually came down and spent the weekend with Reggie Fountain. I think Reggie Fountain had a condo down here, and he was trying out a fishing boat. So that Sunday, of course, Secret Service, they let us know that he was coming down. That Sunday, myself, and I think Garland Terry, I believe you were there, maybe. I know Haywood was there. But anyhow, we were there at the waterfront because we just stopped traffic long enough for him to get in his little armored vehicle to head on. But he started to it, then he stopped, came across the street to where we were standing and thanked each one of us. And I thought that was pretty cool because he didn't have to do that. He didn't know us from Adam. So those are some of the things, the cool things that I got to experience while I was in Moorhead. Obviously, I started as a rookie officer. Nick Galantis, one of our former town commissioners, God rest his soul, he was on our city council at the time, and he was a fun person to work with. He really was. And I think my first probably 6 months of working, because like I said, I was 20 years old, and they put me working daytime for about a month before it may have been longer than that, but I remember they signed me with, some of y'all may remember the name Joe Rose. They assigned me to Joe Rose as my training officer guy. And one of the things I looked forward to Monday through Friday was going down to the Carolina Cafe. Wasn't that the name of it, Nikki? Yes. No. It was the Busy Bee. Busy Bee, and I think a new restaurant just opened up in there. Is that the same place where Marker 3 is at? Okay, so it was in there between, okay. Well, anyhow, but that was one of the things that everybody met there. When I say everybody, back then the city, they'll call him city manager, he was called the city administrator, met there. The mayor was there on some occasion, but usually a lot of the town councilmen were there. But it was a treat to go in there and sit at the table with them and drink coffee. Now, obviously, I'm sure they were talking a business. I didn't care. I just thought I was around a bunch of bigwigs, so it was cool for me. Of course, after I got out on my own, that kind of stopped. But those are some of the cool things that I got to experience. Trying to think, it was one other thing that I was going to say, and it has slipped my mind. So unless anybody's got any questions, what a lot of the stories that David told, yes, and I read his book, and you need to get the book because it's a great read. But yes, there's been so many times that they would bring somebody over, we'd take them back, they'd bring them back over. Then there has been times that we just said the heck with it and wound up taking them to Havelock, believe it or not. We'd bypass Newport altogether. So, but we'd wind up, but David wasn't at New Havelock at the time, but yeah, just because it was, if you didn't, there was a potential for problems. So that was our way of taking care of those problems. That's all I have, unless anybody has any questions off the top of their head. Yes, ma'am.
David as well. At what point in your experiences did you have the sense that the lack of respect for law enforcement was beginning to come into play?
I will tell you just this, for me, I didn't experience a lot of that during my career because I just did not. Like David said, the officers now, you wouldn't dare have a beard. I never grew a beard until I retired, and I grew it and I shaved it off one summer. My wife said, "Why'd you do that?" I said, "Well, it was hot." She said, "You need to grow it back. You look better with it." So I've kept it. So, but this day and time, again, like David, I think the uniform shirt, I don't know. I just did not experience that. And I will say I am still a bona fide certified law enforcement officer in the state of North Carolina. I have been certified now for 48 years. The last 2 years, the kind sheriff down there has graciously sworn me in as a special deputy with the sheriff's department. I still do all the same training, in-service training that any law enforcement officer in North Carolina does. Still have to qualify on the range. And the reason why I switched, he graciously, when I ran for Morehead City Town Council, it was told that it could be a conflict of interest if I was still a sworn Morehead City officer. So that was the reason why, and I'm glad he picked it up for me. So I hope that answered, on my behalf, your question.
Online, the later on, I'm so glad I retired in 28. I mean, I'm like Richard. I always try to treat everybody fair, and I tell every one of my officers, treat everybody like you want to treat your grandma, or your wife, or your daughter, or your son. So they don't let you anymore, and then you got to do what you got to do. But there's just the overall lack of respect in society and everything. He was coming in. And that's one of the main reasons I retired in 2018. I'd be a jail. I am not on, what some of these officers go through today and have to put up with. So I would say in the last 10 years, I can see it change.
Anybody else? I'm sorry? Oh. All right. Well, thank y'all.
Richard, you brought a bunch of historical things that we can all maybe step over and take a look at, right? Is that one? Okay. Okay. And we might have to, like, enlist you at the History Museum, because, like, what I was seeing, it was, we might want to have some of that here and talk about the history of law enforcement through your eyes and through things that you've collected there. That'd be great. Okay. So next up is Miss Wren Johnson. And she is she was the first female police chief in Morehead City. Did I get that right? Yes. So come on up to share with us.
Every time I speak at anything law enforcement, somebody in the audience yells, "Stand up," because you can't see me over the podium. But anyway, I started in Morehead City in 1986. Richard actually sat on my review board with Bill Conde. Bill Conde hired me, and I know most people in here have heard of Bill Conde. Mr. Galanis was on the board. Bill Chadwick was on the board. There were a bunch of them on the board. Anyway, I was a lot smaller then than I am now. Not any taller, but just a lot smaller. So I was tiny. My first day, Bill Conde said, well, he walked in and I was sitting on the bench and he said, "You think you can take me in a fight?" And I stood up and I said, "Absolutely." And he busted out laughing. And one of my favorite things about him was he always called me little girl. And if you knew, I was the only female officer in town in Morehead City. So anytime I walked in and I would hear Chief Conde say, "She did what?" I knew exactly it was me. So there was nobody else. So that was the thing with Bill. And they didn't have a uniform that fit me, and he didn't think I was going to stay. So he didn't buy me uniforms in the beginning. I'm left-handed. He gave me a right-handed holster. And I said, "What if I have to shoot somebody?" He said, "You're not going to have to shoot anybody, for God's sakes." And I was like, okay. Well then, and I don't know if this is true, but Albert Lee, if you know Albert Lee told me that the first day I went to school crossing with him at 12th and Arundel, that somebody called the station and said, "If you're going to bring your kids to work, you need to put them in something that fits." Because my uniform pants probably would have fit Garland. I mean, they were like a foot too long, and I had a belt on that would have fit, probably Albert Lee at the time. So, but I worked with Fogo, and Fogo was we got in a fight one time, talking about fights, at George's Lounge. And the guy, we run through the woods, chasing him, wrestled with him. He was shooting at us. I was bleeding. Fogo was bleeding. One sheriff deputy showed up. We got the guy. Fogo took him to jail and then brought him back. And I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, he said he was sorry. He didn't mean to do it." And I was like, "He could have killed us," Fogo said, "but he didn't." I was like, okay. So a lot of taking people back and forth. A lot of people don't know that we had riots in Morehead City early in my career. One of my first calls was a fake call down on Bay and Avery. And when we got down there, the call was a body laying in the road. When we got down there, they were throwing bricks at us. They just wanted us to come down. That's how much Morehead City has changed. There were areas that were not good. We bought a building after I retired. We bought the old Shaboom's building, David, and you remember a lot of fight calls at Shaboom's. Yeah. And the first time I walked in that building, my first instinct was to duck, because people, when we would get in there, they would throw beer bottles at us. So there was a lot of fighting in Atlantic Beach back in the day. Unfortunately for Morehead City, I think all of those bars have moved to the Morehead waterfront now. And I don't have a lot of fond memories of going to fight calls in Atlantic Beach. The year we had the riots on Memorial Day weekend, do you remember that? A lot of fighting, a lot of riots. We were fighting. I got a phone call when I walked in. We didn't have cell phones then. So I got a phone call and it said, "Grab your riot gear, go stand on the corner." I lived at Bonner Avenue and Bridges. "Go stand on the corner. They're going to come and get you. They're going to take you to the beach." Well, I was out there holding a riot helmet that I had never put on my head before, a riot helmet and all kinds of gear. And they took me to Atlantic Beach. I'd never seen anything like this before. I mean, fights everywhere. They dropped us off. They dropped me off at Demas Thompson's building at 205 Atlantic Beach Causeway. And they said, "Run as fast as you can, dodge whatever they're throwing at you, but run to the police department." And when I got to the police department, oh my gosh, everybody was fighting. Everybody. We got a call to go to Burt's Surf Shop for a fight call. And the lieutenant that I was with said, "Do we have backup?" And the dispatcher said, "There's none available." and there was about 200 Marines out there fighting. And that was the Atlantic Beach back in the day. Every Friday and Saturday night, because Moorhead wasn't as bad as Atlantic Beach back then, but every Friday and Saturday night, we knew we were going to go to the beach and fight. We also knew we were going to go get the 2 or 3 drunks that they told to bring to Moorhead. We would take them back to the beach, back and forth all day long. But people didn't realize that we had a riot in Moorhead City on Memorial Day weekend. We had to leave the beach and come back to the old Moorhead Hotel, which I think was that Bud Dixon's hotel at one time, Richard? Yeah, so at his hotel, we went back to a fight call, and we had had a shooting on the Friday night with New Bern and Kinston's prom. They let them have a joint prom at the Civic Center. Wound up having a shooting. So that kicked off the weekend of Memorial Day. We also, I don't know if anybody in here remembers, we had a longshoreman march one time down Arundel Street, and we escorted them out of town. It was fine. We had a good, it went well. They got us, said bye, thanked us for everything, and then came back through town and busted through the gates of the port. And so we had to deal with that. People don't realize how bad things were back in the day for Moorhead City and the beach. A lot of stuff with the sheriff's department. We got my first weekend on duty, went to a fight call at the beach, tore up uniform, my big old uniform tore up. The second weekend, we had a fight call down on Bay Street that was so bad. Albert Lee was the lieutenant. He said, take everybody to the police department. Sorry about that. And then he said, Moorhead, call everybody in the county. Every working, non-working, anybody you can get them to the police department. And Buddy Thomas was the sheriff at the time. When I first started, Ralph Thomas Sr. was the sheriff. And then Buddy took over, and Buddy Thomas came in, and like the cavalry came in, Atlantic Beach, Pine Knoll Shores, this entire sheriff's department in the old police department. And there's probably, unless they painted over it, probably still some blood stains from that fight. And that was my second week. And I called my mom that week and said, I love this job. And I'm not like them. I did not want to grow up wanting to be a police officer. I know my family, I'm the black sheep in the family for being a police officer. They were on the other side of the law. So my second week, I called my mother and said, I'm going to retire from this place. I love this job, and I'm going to be the police chief here someday. And actually, that worked out for me. I also have met several presidents. I've been invited to the governor's mansion for lunch because of the DARE program. I went to the DARE program with Beulah Mitchell and somebody from Beaufort PD. I can't remember his name, but anyway, if you knew Beulah, anybody in here remember Beulah Mitchell? When I was up here, I said, wouldn't it be nice if Beulah Mitchell could tell us the real stories of the sheriff's department back in the day? But there weren't a lot of females in law enforcement back then. It was me, Beulah Mitchell, Tammy Thomas. I kind of wish Tammy would be here today because she also worked at the beach in Moorhead and the sheriff's department, because each little community is a lot different. The beach was a lot different. I can't tell you now that we own the Shavooms building how many people come in and say, I met my husband over there, or I got thrown off the back balcony one time in a fight call. I mean, there's tons of stories from that building over there. But Moorhead City was a different place back in the day. And I think, as Richard said, he didn't deal with a lot of disrespect. And I think that the reason we didn't deal with a lot of it was because we were very community-oriented. Everybody knew us. You would be hard-pressed to find somebody that doesn't know Richard Abel. And when we hired Renee Hester, I'd go somewhere with Renee. And I'm not from here. I'm from High Point, Greensboro area of North Carolina. Grew up on a farm up there. But I'd go somewhere, and they would talk to them like they grew up with them, and they'd look at me and say, you ain't from here, are you? And I'm like, is it tattooed on my forehead? How do you know I'm not from here? But they always did. You ain't from here, are you? No, I'm not from here. But I did go to college in Wilmington and couldn't imagine going back to the big city, so that's how I wound up in Moorhead City. But it was, and I came in about the time crack cocaine took over, so I was very fortunate. I got to work undercover and I bought a lot of drugs, and I bought a lot of drugs in Jacksonville and New Bern and different places. And when my son got married, he got married in New Bern at in the gardens in New Bern at the Tryon Palace. And the only thing I could think of was all of our family, my parents, your grandparents, all these people are coming. And you don't know how many drugs I bought right there with people holding machine guns, and you want your 80-year-old grandparents to walk from there. So anyway, it's just, I know where all the bad places are in every city. You come through New Bern and you think how beautiful it is. And the only thing I can think of is how many places I went and bought crack cocaine. Jacksonville, Same way. And there was a Jacksonville female officer that just had my number, buddy. Every time I went there to buy drugs, she stopped me. She drugged me out of the car. And the first time she stopped us, the informant ran a stop sign. And so she was right there. I swear, she knew when I came in the city limits. And I was so scared. I'd never seen crack cocaine before. And they gave me $40 and told me to go buy it. And so I had crack cocaine and a big old 45 in one pocket and crack cocaine in the other. And she told me to get out of the car. And I was like, I'm going to die right here on the side of the road in Jacksonville. Fortunately, I was wearing a wire, so the Jacksonville PD came and showed up, and she didn't kill me. But they did handcuff me and take me back to the department. So I was very fortunate. I got to do a lot of things like that. I met George Bush. Which one? The son. I met Junior at the National Academy for the FBI in Quantico, and he's just like his dad. He stayed. He said, I'll stay here and shake hands until the last one of you's gone. So you get to do a lot of really cool things in law enforcement, and I hope that that's still true today. I think the world is different today. That, if you ride by a police officer, he's looking at a computer. We were riding by with our arms stuck out the window, waving at everybody. They ride by reading everything on a computer. So we have taken them out of the communities and kind of locked them in the cars a lot more. They're dispatched through the cars now. We would have a dispatcher come on. I used to stop a lot of cars. I stopped so many cars, they called me Radar Ren. I was walking through the old AMP one time, and I heard somebody say, that's Ren, she'd stop her mama. And I was like, she'd write her mama a ticket. And I was like, my mama would know better than to speed through Morehead City. But but I was very fortunate to come along when I came along. It was, I had a lot of opportunities. I wasn't the first female officer in Morehead City. I was just the first one dumb enough to stay or smart enough to stay, however you want to look at it. There were, I think, two, Richard and I were talking about this before, there were two of them before me that came and went. From the very first day, I thought, I was scared to death to be a teacher. Terrified to be a teacher. The thought of having to teach your children how to read terrified me. So I did the one thing that I wasn't scared of, and that was being a cop. So, and everybody thinks I'm crazy for saying that, but I was never scared to be a police officer. Never. I don't ever remember being terrified or scared or thinking that I was going to lose a fight. I just always thought I was just going to do the job and go home, which I was very fortunate to do. I'm very thankful that I had that career. If you could mic this group up here, without one of us at a time talking, just put a microphone in a group of police officers, you would hear the real stories of law enforcement. Some of them we won't ever tell because it's not our story to tell, but there was some fun times in law enforcement back in the day, and I hope that there still are. The Morehead City Police Department, they paid for education. I'm an educated person because of the Morehead City Police Department. I mean, I went to college and quit because I didn't want to be a teacher. And then came here, and Morehead City put in place and gave us an opportunity to go get our education, which a lot of us did. So we're very fortunate to work in Morehead City and Carteret County. I'm one of those people, like they said, I wasn't born here, but I got here as quick as I could, and they have never been able to run me out. So it was a great place to raise kids. It's a great place. The school system is amazing. And all of those things are because of law enforcement, because this is the safest community you can find. So thank you very much for letting us talk. Yes, go ahead.
Probably memory of this, but in the 1980s on Noyes Avenue, you saved my son's. He was just a little tot. We lived at 118, and he had wandered off into the neighborhood, and I was hunting him, and nobody was home except you came by in your car. And you said to me, and I'll probably cry about it, because
don't cry,
you've stayed history.
They'll call me a wuss.
You've stayed history within our family, because you said to me, "Don't worry, we'll find them," and we did. I mean, he was still in the neighborhood. He was just hiding from everybody. But then, after then, it was like, "Don't make me call Miss Wren," but because I was panicking, really. And you were so calm. And I just want to praise you nearly 40 years later.
Well,
and thank you
much
for that.
Thank you.
Want me to hold that? All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Ren. That was wonderful stories. I'm a dingbatter, and so I don't know any of that history. That's a fascinating, all the stuff you said. What do you attribute the change to? Because as far as I can see, that's not happening. I think you said that level of fighting and crime and whatnot is not here now, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do you attribute to change?
Good old-fashioned law enforcement. I think you saw a major shift in law enforcement in Carteret County in the mid-'80s. And I will just throw this out here, too. I tried to recruit Asa to come to the Morehead City Police Department. Clearly, he made the wrong decision. But I think it's, I had this discussion with several city managers throughout my career. If you don't have good law enforcement, you don't have a good city. And I don't care how good your city is, your city council, I don't care how good any of that is. If you don't have good law enforcement that people know and trust, you have problems in your city. And I don't think we had bad law enforcement before I came or before these guys came. I just think that they learned more of how to work together as an entire county because each community is different. And that's the premise of community policing. If you're policing in Zone 1 in Morehead City, which is downtown area, you got two different worlds. The world on the south side is a whole lot different than the world on the north side was. So you had to police that section and this section. You can't police everybody the same. Community policing came into play right when I got involved in law enforcement. And I think that made a huge difference. I think we've gotten away from that. We're trying to please everybody with the new fancy uniforms and the beards and the long hair and look like they're going into LA fights, in the gangland with the way we dress. I think we've gotten away from that. But I think the safety of this county is because of really good law enforcement. And I don't think that has diminished. I think the lack of respect, I've never been a fan of casual Fridays, like dressing down for Friday, because I think you act the way you dress. And I think if you dress down police officers or firemen or city workers or anybody in government, they act different, and you're treated different if you dress differently. And I think it's like the military. I don't think you'll ever see military the way law enforcement has gotten in the United States. And I'm not going to stand here and critique law enforcement because they do an amazing job in a different world. They're doing the best they can do right now, and we did the best we could do. But we really did clean up Morehead City. And I think when Asa came into the sheriff's department, he had a mess on his hands, and I'll let him tell that story. But he's done a good job with the sheriff's department, and the beach has changed. I mean, Atlantic Beach is not the same as it used to be. And for the good. Morehead City has all the bars now. If you've noticed, there are very few bars in Atlantic Beach anymore. They've all migrated across the bridge. When I came, we had George's Lounge, which was, most people probably don't even remember, a hole in the wall that was, just a redneck fight club, basically. But anyway, it's changed. Everything in the world has changed. The internet has changed a lot. Like I said, we didn't have a computer to look at all day. I'm not a person that can be by myself for very long, so I stayed out of the car talking to people most of the time. As you can tell, I can talk all day, so I'm going to sit down and shut up so Garland and Asa can talk. So thank y'all very much for listening and having us here.
This has been amazing. Thank you guys so much again. Next on our list is Mr. Garland Terror. Would you please come up and please make sure, like Ren did, to introduce yourself to us.
Thank you so much for allowing us all to be up here, and it's kind of a reminiscing thing for us, because we think back to these days that we don't think about every day and take for granted. And my name is Garland Terry. I'm probably the only one here out of this group that came here from an outside county. I'm originally from Durham, North Carolina, grew up there, and started out my law enforcement career with the sheriff's department there, spent a little over 10 years there. One of the things that I think about in the changes of law enforcement, when I first started out, it was very, all my administrators and supervisors were so no nonsense. Everything was business and rigid when I first started. I think back to that. I got hired. I tried for 6 months. I made a mistake of trying to get hired during an election, and the incumbent sheriff was running for election, and then a new sheriff came in. So in the last month or so, the incumbent said, "I'm not hiring anybody else right now until after the election." Then the new sheriff comes in, and then he has to decide who he wants to get in and get out. So 6 months later, I get a phone call, and I called him every week. I wanted to be a deputy sheriff so bad. Did not want to be a police officer in the city of Durham. They were public safety. They fought fire and did police work. I wanted no part of fire, no part of it. And I got called on a Wednesday before the 4th of July weekend in 1983. And the major said, "Do you still want a job with us?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Be here Friday afternoon, July 3rd, for a holiday weekend." I already had my holiday plan. I said, "I'll be there." And I said, "What do I bring?" He said, "Wear black shoes and a black belt." And they gave me one pair of pants, one shirt, one holster, one gun, and 18 bullets and a badge. And that was what I started with in 1983. Thought I was on top of the world at that moment. And it took a while. I had to work a while to get more than that one pair of pants. I had to work a few months. They had to decide if I was going to stay. And so then they gave me a couple more pair of pants, a couple of shirts, and this, that, and other, and the minimum stuff. The sheriffs, unless they've changed, the sheriffs were a little bit different. The sheriff could hire you, and he or she had 12 months to send you to BLET. Is that still correct, Sheriff?
It was. Training standards changed it, and now we're changing it back halfway. It'll take too long to explain.
Okay. I got hired and started out in the jail. Not certified, had no clue about law enforcement. And I guess that's why they put me in jail. So I really wouldn't have to make those law enforcement decisions out on the street with nobody around. And then after a while, and just to kind of show you how much further I am behind Dave and Richard, my BLET was 240 hours. Theirs was 160. Oh, look at that. Anyway, I spent 10 years there. It was very enlightening, and as time went on, I got married in that time frame and decided that was really not where I wanted to raise my family, even though I had grown up there. Even back then in the 80s, Durham, to other law enforcement officers around the state and other places, it was referred to as Little Chicago. That was just the nickname we had when we went to training and stuff. And you say you're from Durham, they say, "Oh, Little Chicago. Yeah, okay." So I came to Morehead City and kind of went up under Wren and Richard's wing, and they kind of taught me the Morehead City way. You know, I already had 10 years of law enforcement. And the biggest adjustment I had to get used to was going to work with a city police department. In Durham, it was 2 and 3 of us over 300 square miles. And so when you went on call, it was you, and that was it. You were on your own. Here in a municipality, you got people coming to you pretty quick. I mean, if you say, "I need help," they can be there in a matter of a minute, 2 minutes, whatever. Sheriff's departments don't have that luxury. If you're close to the city limits, if a sheriff's department calls for help and calls for mutual aid, then the city can respond. They can be there. And so coming here was an eye-opener for me and learning Carteret County and the Carteret County way. And by the way, in 1994, when I did come here, they were still shuffling them back and forth from Atlantic Beach to Morehead. And I learned that one night the hard way. We had taken one over there, and an hour and a half later, he's back over here at Dairy Queen. And I'm like, where did he come from? And Atlantic Beach brought him back. So anyway, that was still going on. Carteret County was an eye opener for me. Coming from Durham, it was a little bit bigger city, even though it's not what I call a big city, but it was bigger. And then I came here, and there's everybody knows everybody, and back then, the Packasack grocery stores, all the kids from the high schools worked in them, and everybody knew everybody, and kids and everything. And it's something that I really enjoyed and embraced. Now, my wife came from a smaller community, Mebane, North Carolina, so she was used to coming in a small community where a lot of people knew people. But it was a big thing for me, and going to work with Richard and Wren. My first seafood festival, and since Wren opened the door for this, talking about the standing up, that first seafood festival that I worked that year, because I started in June, and the seafood festival was quite an event to me. But I was following her around. She said, just follow me. And we're in crowds, and people are everywhere. And I am constantly, every time she stops to speak to somebody that she knows or Richard knows, everybody knows them. They won't walk 5 steps before they stop again. I'm looking at the crowd and over top of her, and I walk into her. I plow into her time after time after time. And anyway, but things are different. I like to say we had a lot of fun. We incorporated fun when we could into our job. And early on in law enforcement, I don't think there was a lot of it. I think it was all very, very serious. The stories could go on and on about, events and things and to go back to Durham and talk about how everybody was so serious. I had a lieutenant, and he was probably 60-some years old. And I had been in my training phase out on the street for 2 nights. And my training officer was called off the street to go dispatch because our communicator had gotten sick and had to go home. So that put me in the car all by myself that night. And I get a rape call. And, I just start shaking like a leaf, going to this rape call. And I called my lieutenant and asked him to switch over on another radio channel. And I said, did you hear that call? And he said, yes. And I said, are you on the way? He said, not right now. I said, this is my first one. He said, you'll do fine. You'll do fine. And he showed up 30 minutes later. But very, very serious. I had a sergeant at midnight. He didn't want you to say a word unless a dispatcher called you. He said, I don't want to know you're here unless a dispatcher calls you after midnight. Very heavy-handed back in those days when I started in 83. Now, again, I'm talking about Durham. I didn't get here till 94. And of course, at that time, community policing was really coming into play, which was a real big change in philosophy for law enforcement as a whole. And I think this community and I think our department embraced it very well. And I think it was very successful. And a lot, until you understand it, it doesn't mean you don't do law enforcement, but you become part of the community, and we are part of the community, Law enforcement is part of the community, they're in the restaurants and they're in the churches and they're in the neighborhoods. I mean, we are part of the community, and so that was part of gelling law enforcement with the community, which makes everybody way more effective. And if everybody's talking to each other and trusting each other. So, my experience, I had a wonderful career in law enforcement. I was ready to go when I went. I did right at 31 years, minus 2 or 3 months. But I had a wonderful career and I summed that up very simply. I never was ever seriously hurt. I never seriously had to hurt anybody, and I never got sued. And I take that as a very successful career. Not everybody can say that, I mean, there are people that get hurt all the time in this, both sides of the fence, the bad guys, the good guys, everybody. Just unfortunate nature of the job. But for the most part, I look back at mine and it was a blast. I don't think I want to do it today. It has changed a lot. I'm not sold on the relaxed appearance, with all the facial hair and stuff. I'm not. I just, that's, call it old school, whatever. That's what my wife says. She said, "Oh, you old school." And I said, "Well, okay, I am." But that's the way it was. And I think that instilled, for a lot of people, I think it instilled a sense of pride. And I think when you have pride and you walk up, it people notice it. They feel it. They feel if you're confident and feel good about what you're going to do. But again, society's changing. It's changing all the way around with a lot of things, and law enforcement's a part of it. All public safety is a part of it. And so it doesn't mean it's necessarily bad. It just means that that's just not me. When I look, I think back to us, and I think back to these pictures up here that are up there at Richards, and y'all really need to look at that stuff before you leave, because it's a lot of cool stuff there. And but when I look at that, I look at all those people, and that's the image I still have. So, anybody have any questions? I mean, these are things, all of us could just go on for hours and hours and hours with stories and stuff. But, and of course the sheriff, I'm sure he'll have a take, because he's still current. All right.
You turn.
Saying that there are folks that look at that. Come here. This is what Ren used to wear.
All right. Well, last but certainly not least, and I'm glad of the way it ended, to have you up here, Sheriff. That would be great. Come on up, Sheriff Asa Buck. Come share with us. And we brought you an easel so you can set your picture right there if you'd like. You talk as long as you want to. I have the key. I have the key to the building.
Some of our other meetings usually fits to times when it's on the thing.
And there's more food back at the back, too, so.
I guess I could have set this up here the whole time, but
it's all right.
That'd been too easy.
Well, first off, thanks for feeding me. Anybody feeds me, I'll make sure to show up. I had jotted some notes over the past few days, and of course, when you get the benefit of listening to everybody else talk, it jogs things in your mind and your memory and whatnot. And if I try to touch upon everything that was said before me, we'd probably be here an extra hour or so. I would like to read one thing, because we kind of talked about respect and law enforcement and people dealing with folks. This is a quote from Ronald Reagan. "No government at any level and for any price can afford the police necessary to assure our safety and our freedom unless the overwhelming majority of us are guided by an interpersonal code of morality." We talked about raising the pay from $6,000 to $8,000 a year. It costs money to have law enforcement. It costs even more money to have quality law enforcement, and to be able to recruit, select, put those people to work, and retain those people who are out here working on the roads and in our jails and in every other position across the law enforcement and judicial spectrum. And so you can't
you can't hire enough police to police your way out of every problem. And the great thing about Carteret County is the people are what make this place great. And like everybody else has said before, every community is different. And even right here in this county, and you've already heard them say it, it's been this way a long time, and it's the same way today. Emerald Isle is different than Atlantic Beach. It's on the same island at opposite ends, but it's different. Salter Path is different than Indian Beach, and they're right there together. Even down east, all the individual communities in the eastern part of the county are different. Even the dialect. Everybody thinks that everybody down east sounds like me, and we all talk the same. But if you go from one place to the other down east, we all have a little bit different dialects and that type of thing. And as Chief Johnson said, policing is different from place to place. Sheriffing is different than city police. But a lot of what Chief Johnson said, all these things kind of come down to community policing. Sheriffs have been doing community policing for a long time. Of course, we have greater areas to cover. And community policing is different from place to place. When you've got a city police and the officers can get out of their cars and walk into the businesses or walk a beat, that type of thing. Sheriffs can't do that. We're out there in the county where we've got, hundreds of miles to cover for the entire county from one end to the other, and out in rural areas, and houses are far apart. Deputies don't get out and walk a beat. So we got to get in the, of course, back in the old days, I had to get on a horse and go somewhere, and you got to hop in your car and you got to go from here and there. And, David, you talked about Shirley's Bar. A lot of people, David, and a lot of the others, we all know a lot of the same people, whether they worked in a police department or in the sheriff's office out in the county. And, of course, I know the individuals that David was talking about. And I had to deal with that same fella. Luckily, whenever I had to deal with him, he was much older. And David and those guys wore him out a little bit. They softened him up by the time I had to, because I worked down east when I was a deputy. But Shirley's Bar was actually owned by my great aunt, Shirley. She was my grandmother's sister. And I'll tell a funny story. I want to say this before I go and talk about some other things. When I was a deputy, a lot of these stories seem to revolve around bars and little watering holes. You have some more established bars, and then you have some of these dives and holes in the wall, and they're here today, they're going tomorrow. Now, there used to be a store down in near the Core Creek Bridge. It was a convenience store when I was young and growing up. And when I was a deputy sheriff, for about a year or so, it got converted into a little bar. And people would go there, and every now and again we get called over there for fights. And I got called out there one night. I was a deputy. Right, yeah, right there. And so I get called up there. Of course, when you're on the road by yourself, when you're on the road as a deputy sheriff, even if you have other deputies working, they're far away from you, like has already been mentioned. And so I walk in this bar, and I forgot what had happened. It was a fight, or somebody damaged a vehicle outside or something. And just as soon as I walked in the door, well, there was two ladies in there, and they were doing DJ music, stuff like that, spinning the records and all that kind of stuff, CDs or whatever. Just as soon as I walked in the door, it was just like out of a television show where you see the person goes in the wrong place, and you hear the needle scratch across the record. They were playing some song, and just as soon as I walked in my uniform, they cut that song off, and then she started singing, "I shot the sheriff." And I said, "But you didn't shoot the deputy." And I said, "Now, where's this fella I'm looking for?" So we can sit here all day and talk about war stories and funny things that we've done. And we talked a little bit. I think Ren and I were talking to somebody. We got a lot of stories. We got a lot of bad stories. There's a lot of bad that happens in society, even in a wonderful place like Carteret County. And that's what we're here for. We're here to deal with those issues. We're here to deal with and get justice for our victims and comfort the family members and support people in the community. You see a lot of this stuff has been portrayed in the media more in recent years than back when we, were all working on the road and that type of thing. And of course, the media coverage is different than it used to be back in those days too. And sometimes people want to portray law enforcement as though we are different or apart from the communities. We are the community. We're you. You are us. Almost all of us are from right here in the county. And like I said, others come here and moved here because it's a great place to be. Whether you're born here or whether you move here, you're part of the community. And that is the great thing about Carteret County law enforcement. We have 8 police departments in the county and the sheriff's office, local law enforcement. And we all love this community. And people in Carteret County, I feel, the majority of them anyway, they think a lot of us. Because we are the community. You know, we're friends and family and relatives, and people have grown up here and people have moved here, and we care about this place, and we care about the people. We care about the people. Sometimes people want to portray us like we don't, or all we want to do is arrest people, and we don't care about people's problems and that type of thing. Law enforcement officers are problem solvers. Always have been, are today, and always will be. It's not just about enforcing the law. We get called to deal with people when they're dealing with situations in their lives and they need help and they need guidance. They don't know what to do. They don't know who to talk to. Everything isn't just about specifically enforcing the law. There's a lot more to it than that. And it's always been that way. Like David said, years ago, you would do things to help people so you didn't have to arrest. Pre-arrest diversion is a big catchphrase nowadays about instead of arresting people and taking them to jail, you find a way to deal with other things. We've been doing that forever. Forever. We always tried to find ways not to take somebody to the jail. We didn't want to take somebody to jail. Didn't want to have to charge them with a crime. Sometimes they wouldn't let you. And so those are things that we've been doing, ever since law enforcement's been around. Now, we came here to kind of talk about history a little bit. And the sheriff's office is the oldest law enforcement there is in the United States. The office of sheriff is older than the country itself, older than the state of North Carolina, older than the county, older than the county commissioners and all that type of stuff. I'm not going to give you a lesson on sheriffing, but, it's come across from England with the common law and everything else. And so there's been sheriffs here since back in the 1700s. I got a list here that goes back to about the 1800s. And on up, and I think about some of those fellows in the 50s, German Holland, Sheriff Hugh Salter, who I knew personally, was in the lodge with Hugh Salter, and we all a bunch of us went to the same church together. Ralph Thomas Sr. was appointed, then elected in 1966, served for a little bit over 20 years, then retired in 1986. Sheriff Ralph Thomas Jr. ran for election, served for 20 years. I worked for him for about 8 years before I ran. I ran in 2006 and was elected, and luckily and honored to still be your sheriff today. And Chief Johnson mentioned that, I'm glad she pointed that out, that they tried to, I remember talking to you in BLET one night, and she asked me about considering to join the police department. I was already sworn in as a deputy. I went to East Carolina, got my degree in criminal justice, and before I graduated from college, the sheriff had already sworn me in May, about 27 years ago. My first official day was June 1 of 1998. And I was a deputy sheriff. I was working as a bailiff in the courtroom while I was going to BLET. And some of these folks, as was mentioned, were instructors. I know Ren was, and David. So it's either they either get the credit or they get part of the blame for me. And so I was appreciative that Sheriff Thomas gave me the opportunity to work as a deputy sheriff. It's, I think, kind of like Richard, I think you said you kind of knew that you wanted to go into law enforcement. And I knew that I did too. I went to East Carolina and I studied criminal justice. I knew what to major in right when I first got there. Didn't know ultimately what I wanted to do. And so I did an internship with the sheriff's office in 1998, and the sheriff either made the good or the bad decision to hire me. And so I'm still here. And if he hadn't hired me all those years, then I probably wouldn't have had the best opportunity to run for sheriff in 2006. I worked in the sheriff's office, learned almost everything there was to learn about the sheriff's office, working in various divisions and doing a lot. And when I ran, I went out and knocked on about 5,000 doors trying to get elected. But some of the most important doors I knocked on were the chiefs in this county. One thing that didn't really exist all that great back in those days was, I think Ren and some others touched on it, was agencies working together. Some did, but there wasn't really all that much. It wasn't that cohesive many years ago, like when some of us were actually working on the road as younger pups. And that is one thing that I went to every chief in this county and I said, if I get elected, there need to be no sandbox issues with law enforcement in Carteret County. I went to every chief and I made that promise from my perspective. After I was elected, I went back to every chief and said, what I told you and promised you was not lip service, not just trying to get a vote. And I am very proud to say that since that time, and I'm not taking the credit for it, it was all of us working together, and it exists today, almost 20 years later. Cooperation amongst our agencies could not be any better. Our district attorney's office, our law enforcement agencies working together, it has just been phenomenal, and it has been a wonderful thing, and I've truly been honored to be a part of that. So a lot has changed over the years. You know, you've heard some of the discussion from people who have been there on the ground, some of them a lot longer than me. As I said, I was sworn in 1998, so I have a perspective from that time that I have seen myself in my working as a deputy on the road for a few years, and then I was elected sheriff at the ripe old age of 31. And so, you know, my time on the road was somewhat limited. I did a lot in that time frame, but I've been the administrator of the sheriff's office ever since. But I've been very involved through our state sheriff's association, working with the legislature on legislative issues. I've paid attention to what's going on in the community and across our state and our nation, and a lot of things have changed. In some ways, I think there is less respect, not just for law enforcement, but just for things in general. But I don't think that is every single solitary person. You know, I don't think you paint everything with a big broad brush and say that everything is completely different. There are a lot of people that do respect law enforcement and the military and authority and church leaders and society and that type of thing. And you've always had bad actors. You've always had bad actors. You know, I didn't recall that stuff about the riots in Moorhead and that type of thing. I'd probably heard it before and then maybe forgotten it. And I know that the beach used to be rough years ago. And in the early 90s, I spent a fair amount of time over there myself. I was in college and come home on the weekends, and I was a lifeguard on the Atlantic Beach from 1995 to 1998. And so I remember those Atlantic Beach days from the 90s, but it had started easing off around that time frame versus what it used to be in the 80s. Because I remember growing up, you know, some of the folks in my family would say, "You better not be over on that beach." I mean, that was a common refrain. You better not, ain't that right, David? You better not be over there on that beach, because there was a lot going on over there. So people who are here now who have, you know, either lived through that and kind of forgot it, or people who have moved here and don't know what things used to be like here in the county, things here are pretty docile compared to what they used to be in certain places. And, you know, Chief Johnson said, I mean, they worked very hard to clean up Moorhead City. There were some places in Moorhead where you might go and might not feel all that safe. And I tell people, there's no place in this county that I would be afraid to walk right now down any road in this county. And there's some people in this county that really don't think all that much of me, but I'm not afraid they'd come out the house and try to, you know, kill me in the street, that type of thing. And so Carteret County is a wonderful place to be. It's always been a wonderful place to be. It's a wonderful place to be, wonderful people, and it is an extremely safe county. I'd probably say, well, I'm a little bit partial, I think Carteret County is the best place to be. You know, I wake up every day, probably shouldn't say this too much because I don't want people to want my job, but I wake up with the best job in the best county, in the best state, in the best country on the face of the planet. And so you can wake up every day and be guided by that. And I'm sure they've all felt the same way when they were working here as well in these roles. And to be able to work in a place where people do respect you and they respect what you stand for. And it's not just about law enforcement and the police department or the sheriff's office, but we're here for a reason. We're here for the people. We stand for the people. That's what all this means. That's what it stands for. And so we've all seen things played out on the national media over a few years. I was president of the Sheriff's Association back in 2014, 2015, when all the hands up, don't shoot stuff started. You know, and there'd been riots years prior into the 70s and then stuff in the 80s and things going on. The society always has some sort of upheaval that comes here and there, and then things level off. We all remember after 9/11 when everybody in the country came together, Republicans, Democrats, everybody, and everybody loved the police again, everybody loved the military again, and then that type of stuff wanes off, and then you come after the Ferguson deal, and then after 2020 with George Floyd, and just people in society trying to cause hate and division, the national media doing what they did, not doing a very good job, not our local media, and just people with agendas and political agendas and trying to divide people, trying to use law enforcement in that manner, playing people against one another. And we're all out here trying to do our regular jobs in the middle of all these types of things. And we get maligned. You go out and you do your job, you do a good job, and, you know, some people are happy with what you did, and then you got a whole another segment of folks that are mad at what you did. And nowadays we have social media. Used to, if somebody didn't like something you did, you'd sit around in a table like this, we'd chit chat and talk about it, and people would gossip. And you talk to 1 or 2 or 10 people, that type of thing. Nowadays, everything is on Facebook, and all it is gossip is in the written word. And they can say anything they want to say. They can malign anybody they want to malign, call everybody every bad name in the world, talk about how you didn't do your job right. Being in law enforcement has always been difficult because you've always been subject to criticism. I mean, that's fine. We live in a free country. Anybody's free to criticize if they want. But there's just so much nowadays with social media where people just go on there. And I think a lot of people nowadays just really don't know what to believe. It's kind of like if you read something that somebody posts or they said something, you think, well, maybe there is something to that. People seem distrustful of the government and different types of institutions and things like that. And that's why we always have to be so professional. We've got to be right every day, all the time. The bad guys don't have to be right 24/7, 100% of the time. We have to be right all the time. A defense attorney doesn't have to be right every time. A defense attorney can go into court and argue one side or the other side. That's what lawyers can do. They can sit up there and tap dance on the head of a pin on what is correct in the law. But when we make decisions and go to court and make a case, we got to be right. We got to know the law better than they do. Because if we don't apply it, they'll dismiss our cases. They'll find somebody not guilty, that type of thing. So we've got the toughest jobs in the entire criminal justice system. And nobody, because we're the boots on the ground. And it's always been that way, and it's always going to be that way. But talked about some of those old sheriffs, some of the stuff we've had to go through. You know, we've had COVID, changes in criminal activity, people getting drunk and fighting. We've heard a lot of that today. That's been around forever. That's never going to go anywhere. Drugs. Chief Johnson talked about crack cocaine. When I started in the sheriff's office, we were dealing, crack cocaine came in about the early to mid 80s. And when I came into the sheriff's office as a deputy sheriff, we were kicking down doors on crack houses and chasing people selling crack and people using crack and breaking the law doing X, Y, Z. The late 90s come along and that changes. It starts going to prescription drugs. We dealt with a prescription drug epidemic for many years. Work, try to change the laws and practices and things like that. And then heroin comes back. And then fentanyl comes along. And fentanyl results in all these overdoses and deaths and things. We deal with overdoses over the past 5 years like none of us ever dealt with before. People didn't used to overdose on the street drugs that we deal with nowadays. And certainly they weren't dying. We've had 150 people die in Carteret County in the past 5 years from fentanyl or fentanyl and other drugs. And so society is always trying to catch up with those new things. Law enforcement is always in that situation. We're always trying to catch up. Technologies change over time. When I started as a deputy sheriff, all of us didn't have cell phones. And this was in the late 90s. And I remember the first cell phone that I got, it was a bag phone. And we thought we had something. If we had an old bag phone, you put that in your patrol car, man, you could ride down the road. Prior to that, if they'd call you on the radio, and this is in the 90s now, this crowd started before I did, and a lot of people started way back. And if they called you on the communications call and said, call such and such at such and such a number, well, you didn't have a phone in your car. I mean, when I first started and was riding with deputies, we'd have to stop to the convenience store. Hey, can we come in and use your phone? And it was a common thing. You know, we weren't tying their phone up. They were used to us doing it. Or you'd go to somebody's house. So you can call a complainant, you know, who had to talk to you about something. If it was an in-progress call, you'd get sent to it and you'd go there. But if you were just requested to call somebody, you'd go to somebody's house or stop at a convenience store. Or I guess maybe a payphone, you know, if there was, you know, payphones around back in those days in some places. And so, you know, nowadays we have computers in our cars. Everybody's got cell phones. And these are our cameras now. We don't even buy, you know, our detectives have some higher end cameras for photographing evidence and things like that, but our deputies take most of their pictures on their cell phones. And so technology's changed over time. New types of crimes are around nowadays that we didn't have to deal with in years past. Internet crimes against children, all these scams from over the cell phone, over the computer, text messages, those types of, they can fake their numbers. Somebody can call you and try to scam you and make it look like it came from my office. You know, that stuff didn't exist in years past. And we spend so much time dealing with all those issues where the criminals have this technology that they're able to use to try to prey upon people. Didn't have all those types of things in the past. You know, rapes, robberies, murders, those types of things, interpersonal violence, that stuff has been around since biblical days. And that's never going to go away. We're always going to be dealing with those types of things. David was talking about bringing people over to the jail. Now, this picture here, that's Sheriff Bobby Bell. This is somewhere in the late 50s, after 61, because Hugh Salter was sheriff until 61. Sheriff Bell came into office. This is his crew. That's his deputies. And I think one fellow there, he was Bill Bartz. He was the jailer. I talked to former Sheriff Thomas on the telephone last night just to kind of pick his brain a little bit because I knew I'd be coming over here today. And he told me that in the old jail there was only one jailer. I don't mean one on duty around the clock. I mean one person, 7 days a week, 24/7. Well, he didn't work 24/7. He worked till 5 o'clock, and then he was done. After 5 o'clock, it was closed. There wasn't any rounds made at night to make sure the inmates weren't fighting each other. Of course, there was fewer people in jail, and this was I never went in the old jail, but it had been described to me kind of like a Turkish prison you might see on television or something. No, the new jail opened in 1995. The current jail, excuse me, it ain't new. I'm trying to get a new one built. The current jail opened in 95, and so the old jail that was there had been from the 50s. And it was dilapidated and run down. It wasn't up to snuff. And so, but there weren't all that many people coming to jail, you know, back in the 60s and 70s and 80s were coming along, more stuff going on. And so when you went 2 cells for women, yeah. And women were rarely arrested back in those days. There was a lady who would work, she worked part-time, you'd have to call in a matron if a female was brought to jail and the magistrate, you know, ordered them held into custody. So there was never a female who was just there waiting, you know, for a female to get arrested, a female detention officer, jailer. They would have to call in a matron to sit there with the females to make sure that, you know, males and females were interacting and that type of thing. But if you arrested somebody after hours, I guess it was probably, you know, in the 60s and probably somewhat up to the 70s at some point, you had to go there to the jailer's door there where he had his bunk. You had to go there and knock on the door, wake him up, so he could come out there and accept that inmate into the jail. And so, you know, that jail was there, like I said, until it was under construction in the early 90s. I remember driving by it because I'm from Beaufort, lived in Beaufort all my life, and I watched it as it was being constructed. I was in college. And until 1995, when they opened up a bed with 116 beds. And long around the early 2000s, that jail's been at capacity, or significantly over capacity ever since. And, of course, I won't go in talking about the need for a new jail, but I could talk another hour or two about that. But anyway, oh, yeah. Oh, that was the other thing.
And they eat well.
Yeah.
We eat well. They're trying with this. We make sure they eat jail.
Yep.
Like on this,
I guess you would say it's kind of like Aunt B bringing some home cooked food down to the jailhouse down there to Otis. You know. Oh yeah, yeah. That might have been why some of them kept coming back, or maybe they didn't mind that ride from Atlantic Beach or Morehead over to the jail. That's what it was. They kept dealing with, "Would you take me to Beaufort?"
Yeah.
And so anyway, I know we're running a bit on our time, and there's probably, gee whiz, there's a lot more stuff I could stand here and talk about. Does anybody have any questions? And like I said, one question might lead to another. And yes, sir.
Can you hear me? Me not. So,
Part of the reason why I became interested in law enforcement in the county is because of this book.
Mm-hmm.
See, agreed?
Yeah.
Do any of you know that story? I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
The only thing I can say is, yes, I was a police officer during that time. And if I'm not mistaken, I tried to go back and research it. Back when we first started, all of our weren't any computers. Everything was written down in a logbook. And there's a plethora of them down at the police department right now that I think early on, I know there's some back in the 1950s, may go back to 40s, but I went down there to look on that specific date that boat came into the port. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe I was actually working that night. Now, unbeknownst to me at that time, but yes, obviously from there on after we followed it, and I think, Doug McCulloch was the U.S. attorney at the time. I know he was down here a number of different times, along with a number of DEA agents and other federal officers. But that's kind of all I know about it.
A very good friend of mine, Ray Freeman, he was pretty intimately involved in that. And, that would take way more time than we've got here. And Doug wrote a pretty good book about it, from start to finish on it. But there's a whole lot more backstory than what's in the book there. But that's a pretty good book you wrote.
I inherited this book from my mother, and it was signed. I thought, well, maybe this guy's around anymore, and I just learned recently he passed away. Yeah, but I actually ended up calling him and talked to him and Lucci. They're still alive, but I think the rest of them got yeah. Thanks.
So a lot of you have talked about all the fights at Atlantic Beach. Who was doing all this fighting? Was it locals or Marines or people from out of town?
Marines. We had from Cherry Point. You talk to them, so they had a little bit of education because they worked on the jag. It was usually you just hit him in the head. To start with, they thought he lived in the woods. They wouldn't listen. In fact, we had shore patrol back then. They would have a station in Morehead, and shore patrol could walk with us. And but they just got it more. And shore patrol took care of most Marines. We would take them up and get over shore patrol. Then they take them back to the base, and what they did, wherever they did with it. We get some local fights, and like your friend said, Shaboons, I don't remember if it was Majors or Hers. So there was that building and one right 300 foot from it, and another on the same side. Maybe even Hers. They were resident bars. They fought all the time, 300 people in each bar. So it just depends. But speaking to the sheriff, you had to have the people's respect because we were always outnumbered. Same thing in Morehead and everything. 3 or 4 officers against 3,000. Mm-hmm. We're going to lose every time, but we try to respect the locals. And they give it back to us many times. They would watch our backs in these crowds and stuff. We were in there fighting. The local Bobby Williams and some of the others, David Lee, we'd be in the crowd. All of a sudden, we see a head fall. And Bobby or David taking care of somebody that was on our back. we got a big fight down in the surf off of the boardwalk there. And we were worried, we were in the water fighting, and we were worried all these people coming down. But when we got done, we come back up, the motorcycle gangs that were there, we always told the motorcycle gang, we kept finding the leader, and we said, look, you take care of your people. If they get too far out, and I'm going to arrest them. And our motto was, if we arrest you, go into jail, or a piece of you going to jail. Something. But we come back on the boardwalk, they were there standing, not letting nobody go down. But we tried to treat them fair, and that night they decided to help us out. So we didn't have to do that. One of the stories in the book. So, respect begets respect, and that's what we try to do. That's the only way you could make way to it. Be a silver tongue devil. You better be able to talk your way out of the situation. There's always more of them than you.
There used to be a Kwanzaa beside the police
Yes.
department in Morehead City. So we had to show work got up. And that was pretty cool. When all the Marines would get in trouble, that's when we got
One other thing I want to echo what the sheriff said about Carteret County. We do enjoy a very safe county here. I've been at the college almost 11 years, and I talk to a lot of classes, and I don't teach. I'm over their security department, but I talk to a lot of classes about safety. But one thing I always come back and tell them, I said, look, y'all don't understand. We do not have the problems that right up the road that Craven County has, right up the road that Onslow County has, Lenore County. We do not have those problems. And I think a lot of it is because of you guys, the people that are here, and I think the law enforcement for the job that they do. That's kind of the way I see it. But we don't, knock on wood, we just don't have those types of problems.
Are you all worried about I-42?
Got to worry about it.
Well, I think everybody's certainly concerned about growth. I mean, with more people, you have more issues. And that's just the way that is, plain and simple. But talking about, support, every one of us has been in a situation where somebody, a citizen from the public, stopped a car and watched us on a traffic stop, came up to us when we were dealing with an issue. Somebody has been there to watch our back and to intervene if necessary, and have intervened when it was necessary. Every one of us personally have dealt with that issue, much less all the other people that have worked here, forever and a day. And so, and it is how you treat people, how you police. But treating people is the same, regardless of who you deal with, where you're at, rural, metropolitan. If you treat people good with dignity and respect, like you said, it will come back to you. It's all in how you treat people. When I was a deputy on the road and we would go arrest somebody, me and my partner Frankie, and Frankie Fulcher was my chief deputy for many years, we'd go and arrest somebody and they'd say, whatever the situation was, look, we're here to serve a warrant on you. We didn't go in there and fussing them out, calling them dirty names, nothing like that. It was, hey, Billy or hey, Joe. They said, well, I don't like the situation, but I'm glad you're the one that came to serve me. It's like we were their friends. I mean, especially people that you deal with a lot. You deal with, like the one, Tom, that what you were talking about, David. It wasn't Tom, that's what we called it. You dealt with Tom tonight, you're going to deal with Tom tomorrow night, or you're going to deal with him next week. So, you don't go around treating people bad and treating people dirty because you want to deal with them again. You try to treat people just as good as you can unless somebody gets to the point that they won't allow you to. And then a lot of times when they sober up the next day, like David said, they actually feel bad about what they did, or if you had to do something and something bad happened to them, they didn't really hold it against you because they knew they were ultimately responsible for it to start with. But it's all in how you treat people. I mean, that's what everything, and we're all in the customer service business. If you go into Walmart, somebody's in the customer service. If you go to Hardee's to get a cheeseburger, somebody's in customer service. We're in customer service too. It's all the same.
We have there's being a peacekeeper and I think in Carteret County, I've always been very fortunate to have in every department a department full of peacekeepers. And so we didn't go in to see who had the most arrests or you had the most violence or you had the most of anything. We went in to keep the peace. And that's our whole job. And I think it still is the motto of law enforcement of Carteret County. Yeah. But then, and we all got along. We live. It's a small. So You know, I think I would much rather when people say, "Oh, it's an Andy Griffith thing." You can learn a lot from Andy Griffith, and I'd never taken that as a I've always taken that as a compliment. You know, if they know you, I can't tell you how many times at the Seeping Festival, and there's 100,000 people on that waterfront throughout the weekend, how many times bad things were going to happen, but didn't happen because they would see a Richard or a Garland or a Ness or somebody or Ace or whoever's walking by. I mean, we had somebody hand me a gun one time that came down there to shoot the preachers that were calling all the little girls bad names. And he handed me a gun in the middle of the Seeping Festival with 20,000 people down there and said, because y'all are here, I'm not going to do this. So, and that's part of being a peace. And that's, I think if you got a good police officer, they will always tell you that they are.
All right, here's a picture from the 60s. Here's a picture from, well, this was from when I was sworn in 2022. I have 115 full-time employees. They're not all deputies. About 40 of those are detention officers. And I've got a bunch of part-timers. It probably goes up to about 140 plus that work in the sheriff's office. We've come a long way from the 1960s. There's more going on nowadays and more people here than there was back in those days. I'm sorry, David, I cut you off.
David, I worked here, that would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, just a side note, North Carolina general statute requires that every sheriff be afforded 2 deputy sheriffs. It's mandated that every sheriff have at least 2 deputies. Not mandated to have more than that. So we're glad our county commissioners look after us a little bit more than giving us 2 deputies. Because if I woke up tomorrow with 2 deputies, I'd have a hard job. Hard enough as it is. I'd be back on the road. Yeah, absolutely. Any more questions? No, I think that probably summed it up. Well, now, how long I've got everybody's attention here, but I would like to recognize Miss Ann Nyberg, who's sitting here with us. She is the wife of, well, I should say John Nyberg, my chief deputy, is her husband. And a lot of friends in the room, people that I've known for quite some time. Some remember me from when I was a little bit younger, and those Mr. Guthrie back there, he tried to teach me some stuff in middle school, and he was sometimes successful, sometimes not. Thank you. You get some of the credit or the blame too. So, and to those that I just met today, it's good to know you, and I'm so proud to have been your sheriff for 18 years, and I appreciate you allowing me to serve in this role.
One last thing I'd like to say, really appreciate it.
I would say one more thing. I meant to say, you're used to that, right, Richard? Well, one more thing. I meant to say it when I first stood up here, but I've known these people personally for a long time. We've worked together for a long time, and I very much appreciate them. They have been true law enforcement leaders in our community, consummate professionals, and I've learned a lot from each and every one of them, and I appreciate them. And, we still work together today in various different capacities. We run a lot of the same circles, and Abel's sworn in with me, and David Bratton, and, that's just what we do. Even when you retire, you're not still completely gone. You're still kind of around, and we're here to support each other. We've done a lot of good together, and that work still continues, along with a lot of other people who deserve a lot of credit. Anyway, thank you.
I wanted to say, especially to Sheriff Asa, since you're the sheriff of Carteret County, we are the History Museum of Carteret County. So we feel your pain when you're like trying to be down east and you're trying to be over there in Beaufort and you're out in Newport. and just trying to cover all the island and everything that's out there. So we really appreciate everybody here today because you brought something else to our table at the History Museum of Carteret County that we can now, as we have Mr. Sawyer Davis over here recording it, so that we can use that in the future as well. And I want to say, I'm not from here. Always wanted to live in North Carolina, and my husband and I chose this place as I prefer, and I hope that I will leave it up to God, that this is my last address on my license plate, or on my driver's license, that we are here in Carteret County. But one of my favorite things about Carteret County is that I've always felt it was a little like Mayberry. And somebody up here used that reference about Mayberry. And there's a good country song that talks about, I miss Mayberry, sitting on the porch, drinking ice cold cherry Coke, where everything is black and white. And so I just really thank you guys. I really want to honor you today because I do feel safe in this community. And I do feel a love for this community too, as we're all joining together to record the history, but then to make history too, and then to go forward. And to make a good plan for the kids that are coming up and the people that are coming up and so forth. So thank you guys very, very much. I think this was really good. And we'll let you know when the podcast is available, so that he's probably going to tell me in 10 seconds. But when the podcast is available so that we can listen to it again. And for all of the speakers here, there is a cup in front of you with some goodies in it and a magnet from the History Museum of Carteret County, and I really thank you for coming here and doing that for us today. Thank you again.
Once again, I'd like to give a huge shout out to everyone that joined us today for the podcast, and I want to thank everyone here for listening. Bye-bye.